joining us on Face to Face is a very well-known person in the Sri Lankan political arena. He is one of the key figures in the Sri Lankan political arena. He was a former Prime Minister twice in the Sri Lankan government, and he is currently the leader of the single largest opposition party in the country, the leader of the United National Party and the opposition leader, Mr. Ranil Wickramasinghe. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Wickramasinghe.
My pleasure to be here with you.
Mr. Wickramasinghe, we have a chessboard in front of us, and we put this here because chess is more or less like politics. You have your own sides, and it is all about protecting the leader, protecting your territory. I'm going to make my first move. You're welcome to do so.
Politics is more than chess. It's teamwork, like cricket. You must have the stamina for a marathon. You must also remember it's a hard game like rugby, and it's a blood sport like boxing.
But politics also matters a lot on the people. At the end of the day, you may make promises, you may make statements, but at the end of the day, what really makes a political party strong or makes a political party victorious are the people. Do you believe in that? Do you believe that the voters in this country have the power to make any political party the strongest political party in the country?
They can regularly give the power, a majority in parliament, to one political party. They can elect a president from a political party. So we believe that the voters have the ability to make that choice, and we have confidence. The strength, one is the electoral strength that the people give you, other is the strength in your own belief and the strength to go through the bad times. The politics consists not only of good times but also bad times and how you survive it.
In any country, the voters they have the power to really change the landscape of the country, and they are usually in political terms known as the wisest people in the game. The voters are known as the wise men. Do you believe that this is true in Sri Lanka, or do you think that voters in Sri Lanka are usually hoodwinked by petty promises, open-ended promises that are made?
Well, voters have the final say, so we decided in a democratic system, it's acceptance that the voters know best. Are they sometimes taken in by short-term promises? Some of the voters are. But what makes them tick? What makes a voter vote for a party? Is the short-term promise? Is it that you didn't like the other side? We don't know. It's a combination of all that gives someone a majority. How the voter's mind works, I mean, people have tried to analyze. We have surveys, we have researchers, we have pre-poll researchers, we have in some countries, when you close the poll, as you come out, there are research, but how it works out, no one knows it.
You have been in politics for a very long time. At the age of, even in your 20s, you were in politics. You worked with some of the stalwarts in the Sri Lankan political arena. You have vast international experiences dealing with politicians from across the world. What are the main policies or principles that your party, the United National Party, the largest and one of the oldest parties in Sri Lankan politics, always has in mind when it deals with its voter base?
Well, we are wedded to democracy. We are wedded to a Sri Lankan nation where all communities, all ethnic groups, all religious communities live in peace, and we are committed to the well-being of the voter to ensure that this country has a prosperous citizens, a strong middle class, both a rural community, farmers and workers who have a good high level of income, and a society in which enterprise is rewarded, initiative is rewarded, and people can, on their merit, go ahead.
May I ask you this question, sir? Why is it then that in recent times that there is a common opinion among the Sri Lankan public that the country has a weak opposition? What would attribute that to the opinions of the people?
No, I would say firstly the people gave the government President Rajapaksa a chance after the war was over to deliver on his promises. In that period, it was one of watching and waiting for the opposition for the UNP. There are various activities we undertook, but that came to an end in 2013 with the budget, and now we have to move ahead. So this is the time that we marshal our strengths, but we are not working in a democratic setup. You know that best here in MTV. You know what you've undergone to ensure that different opinions are expressed. So you are not working in a fully democratic society where those who support us or some of the other political parties are victimized. Some of them have even disappeared. So in that setup, you can't do the politics of the normal society. But it also means that you have to mobilize people, get ready, and throw it into a last thrust.
Because if you put that argument to the people and you say, you know, it's because there's a cap in the media, it's because the media has been suppressed, that the opposition is being looked as a silent opposition, or an opposition that is not really doing much. But is that, what can I say, is that a reliable statement to make?
I have not said that. I just gave the background to the question you asked me. As I what we are telling the people is, now is the time. Let's all get together and get rid of the Rajapaksa regime. So we are moving ahead because of his the strategy of having staggered provincial elections. You can start off a campaign and then have to stop it because they are fighting 2-3 provincial elections. Now everything is behind us except for Uber. We go ahead, and we decided from May onwards that we take the government on, and this is the best time. We have started our mini campaigns. We've got our electoral. We've done our first sounding out of the electorates where the votes are, what we have to get. We are getting our mechanism ready. We are talking with many other groups, political and non-political, on how we face and get rid of the Rajapaksa regime. So from now onwards, we are out there on the street and we are leading.
So you're saying that there is a plan in motion right now for the
there
presidential elections, that is...
Whatever elections, first get rid of them. Anyway, it's going to be parliamentary or presidential, we'll face it.
Okay. The presidential elections, that is at the most important elections in a country, where the political parties lobby to get their leaders to rule the country. The presidential elections, there is reports that it might be as early as November. Is the United National Party ready for presidential election, or is it just taking, as in a cricket match, as you say, they say, no, we take one match at a time, we're not going to look at the entire series?
We are getting ready for elections. Indications are if the government wants to go for elections, it will be about March next year, after the Holy Father's visit. I cannot see one coming early, but we are ready for it. But first is to keep pressure on the government to ensure that elections take place. And that's the movement. We've now taken up the whole issue of free education, free health. The bail issue has come up. The whole issue of corruption, casinos. So we are taking them all in the key areas, and we are moving forward. We come out with some of our key pledges as well as the political vision. But the people in our country think only two parties can form a government and run the country: SLFP and the UNP. So they are looking at what the UNP has to offer, what we are going to do, and we are taking steps to present it to the people.
Let's just analyze the election results, Mr. Wickramasinghe, from the Western Provincial Council, right? In the Western Provincial Council, we saw in 2009 the UNP had 30 seats, but the seats had dropped to 28 in 2014. And in the Central Province, it was the UNP had 27.79% of votes this year. But in 2009 it was 38.65%. Let's talk about the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, they've showed an emergence, as I said, and then they came in third in the Western Province, and the JVP won an additional seat in the Western Province. How would you sort of explain these election results? Because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, no matter what you say, the voter really makes the call. So what do you have to say about these election results?
At the end of these elections, you are still left with SLFP and UNP as the main parties. So that's where the voter preference lies. It's around that the other coalitions form, or the other arrangements are made. You won't have 3, 4, 5 parties competing for only two main parties. Others are talking the third force. But when it comes to a presidential, it will boil down to between two candidates. Who are they and who are they willing to accept? In a provincial council or in a Pradesh Sabha, there is more choice. If you go down to the Pradesh Sabha, you will find numerous parties that have gained. But as you go up the pyramid, you come down. And when it comes to the apex, the presidential, only two. And it's a question of one who will want to safeguard it and the other who will want to abolish it.
Well, on that note, we're going for a short commercial break. We'll be back with more on Face to Face. Stay with us. What you thought, or what the United National Party had to say.
We thought best put it down in writing, and that stayed.
Welcome back to Face to Face. I'm in conversation with the opposition leader of the country, Mr. Ranil Wickramasinghe. Mr. Wickramasinghe, you were talking about earlier about the presidential election and there being just two parties, two main candidates competing for the presidential election. Have you decided to compete for the presidential election?
UNP has decided to put forward a candidate if and when the presidential elections are held. Whether he will have the presidential first or the parliamentary, we do not know. But we have not yet decided on the candidate.
So there's reports that the UNP might field a common candidate. What are your thoughts of that?
The UNP decided after the last presidential that we will have a UNP candidate. But we will talk to the other parties of supporting the UNP candidate. We are already discussing with the other parties, both political and non-political.
So is the UNP waiting until the government announces the date for the elections to announce who it is going to field as the candidate?
We are waiting to know whether the government will indicate whether it's going to be a presidential or a parliamentary. But what we have to do first is to keep pressure on, so the government will be forced to have some election.
Mr. Wickramasinghe, talking about the United National Party, now recently the United National Party introduced the Leadership Council. That was after a proposal that was made by the United Bhikkhu Front of the party. Can you talk to me a little bit about the composition of the party?
There was a proposal that we've been discussing for a high-level council which will manage the day-to-day. One of the Bhikkhu organizations wanted to call it the Leadership Council. So people sat down and worked out something that was acceptable to the party, and that was we got it passed at the working committee and it endorsed at the party sessions.
The Leadership Council has some senior figures in it, but there are actually charges from within the party that the youngsters within the party have not been given a chance within the party to really make their voices heard. Isn't it important for a party, a political party, to have a second tier, Mr. Wickramasinghe?
We have a second tier and a third tier, but Leadership Council, everyone wanted to limit it to 7 or 8 members, and these were the names that came out. Some didn't want to serve on it. So there are the others who are not in it but who are still playing an important role. The Leadership Council would be having the day-to-day affair of the party. The parliamentary groups operate separately.
And what
then
is
the provincial groups.
What is your role within the party?
Well, I am the leader, and what's given in the constitution is still there. I direct affairs, but I work. I am the one who proposed that the day-to-day functions that have been given to me by the working committee be handed over to the Leadership Council as essential. There are a lot of details that have to be gone into. I don't think I should spend my time on it, but I look at what they say and the others, and then coordinate the affairs and ensure that things work smoothly.
You said there were certain people who did not want to be a part of the Leadership Council. One such person was parliamentarian Sajid Premadasa. I'm not sure whether you've heard about this, but he made a release today. He made an announcement today that certain reports stating that he has been vested with responsibilities within the party are in fact false. Were you aware of this?
I'm not aware of release. At the moment the Leadership Council is carrying out the day-to-day affairs. We had a meeting and we said first we will look at our plan as what we are going to do for the next 6 months, and then define what the responsibilities and the task should be. He's agreed to go ahead with the UA provincial elections. The rest, I think we first got to put our ideas down. As I told you earlier, we are at the moment discussing it, and then we would ask people what are the responsibilities or the tasks that they would like to take over. So in the what is the Leadership Council, there are many other work. Now, for instance, I must say Sajid moved the debate, adjournment debate on the question of pensions and the gratuity payments. He's done some others, so he's sort of been increasing his profile and the work in Parliament, which is a good thing. I think he's following what the father did. So let's see as things go on. We'll work it out and then. But at the moment, till we have our final plan out, which will take about another 2 weeks, I think that some of us are meeting again. I've asked some of the members, including Sajid, to meet me not next week, not this week, the week after. Once we define it, then we'll look at the rules. But immediately, I think people are being entrusted with responsibilities for the Uhur Provincial Council.
So within the party, there's a lot of, as you say, a lot of unity, although there are differences in opinions that have surfaced and which have been highlighted through the media, because from the top to the bottom, sometimes you have opinions that are not really aligned with a common opinion of the party. Sometimes there's instances when there may seem as if to the general public that the United National Party does not have a common stance or a common opinion on certain matters, because some members of the party would say something else and some others would say something else. How do you as the leader, Mr. Wickramasinghe, tie all of this together?
On policy issues, there have been very few differences. You saw last week, we were all working together. Even the earlier issues, there have been some opinions expressed as to how the affairs of the party are managed, but I have not found it to be anything that's alarming. There is, we will step into it.
For the presidential election, Mr. Wickramasinghe, you said the last presidential election, it was after the war, and the Mahinda Rajapaksa government really banked on the fact that it won the war, and that has been sort of a slogan or sort of one of their main sort of points which they bring out during every campaign. What is the United National Party having to say about this, the way the war was won by the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime?
But he didn't go to the elections only saying that he won the war. He said, I won the war, now I want time to deliver the goods to you. So you got to judge him by his second pledge.
What are your thoughts on how President Rajapaksa dealt with the war or ended the war in Sri Lanka?
As far as the war is concerned, I would have handled it differently. I would have set a different approach to ensure that the Sri Lanka finally emerge victorious out of it, both through maybe through a peace treaty or may have been a military conflict if they are not willing to accept any settlement. I am sure President Kumaratunga had her own ideas. Each of us had different ways. He is the president, so he conducted. But I certainly don't agree with the fact that he went and signed an agreement with the Secretary General of the UN to inquire into all the allegations. Then thereafter went and enshrined it in the UN Human Rights Council resolution and went before the Darusman panel. In my view, firstly, he should not have denied that there were 0 civilian casualties. You can't have war without civilian casualties, and we did have. There are a lot of innocent people who died because the Prabhakaran used the civilians as a shield. But what we had to do after the war was to see that reconciliation, that we looked into the people who suffered, the Tamil people, and where there has been acts, as the LLRC said, that brought disgrace to the armed forces, to have tried them in the normal courts of law, court martials. We needn't have asked for the UN to come in. We had a system that was strong enough. But then what did President Rajapaksa do? He dismantled the system. He took away the 17th Amendment. And not satisfied, they went and impeached the Chief Justice without following the Latimer House principles. So now the world is saying, look, you have no mechanism by which you can try this. And you all have agreed to international inquiry. So those are things I would not have agreed to. I wouldn't have done petty politics out of it. He thought, I won the war, I must capitalize on it, make the maximum. And he played politics. And as a result, all of us have suffered.
Now, the United Nations Human Rights Council investigation is upon us. There is absolutely nothing that Sri Lanka can do, although it had passed a motion in Parliament last week stating that it is against an investigation, international investigation being held in the country. The UNP abstained from that vote. What are your thoughts about the UNHRC inquiry, and what should Sri Lanka do at this moment of time?
We told the government, if you want to get away from the inquiry, there are two major steps we have to take. Firstly, the Parliament must disassociate itself from the joint communique, from the government decision to include the joint communique in the UN Human Rights Resolution, and the fact that they have made submissions to the Darusman panel. Secondly, we must show that we have a strong domestic mechanism. Thereby, we should reintroduce the 17th Amendment, fully implement the LLRC report, then bring in the Latin House principles to safeguard the independence of the judiciary, and finally bring the Freedom of Information Act. If you don't do that, but the government has not anyway taken a step back, so they have agreed to an inquiry and now they are saying we don't want to take part in the inquiry, so they must sort this issue out, because the reports I hear are such that the UN most probably will not come to Sri Lanka, but they will take what they consider to be prima facie cases that already exist, and will ask the government of Sri Lanka to answer. So then they have to, the government has to decide, are we going to reply or are we not going to accept it?
In instance the government does not accept it or does not respond to it, how do you think that would affect the country? Do you think that Sri Lanka would be cornered in that sense?
I think the government has cornered itself and finished. We've told them we can talk about it, see how we can find a way out, but they are not interested. They feel that they can use this again as a political issue.
What would be the way out that the opposition
that's
would
what we have suggested. Let's show that we have a strong domestic mechanism. Let's implement the LLRC report, which is our own solution, President Rajapaksa's own solution. Let's bring the 17th Amendment back. We have a strong public service, depoliticize public service, depoliticize police, depoliticize judiciary, and also bring the Latin House principles. Then we are capable of inquiring, and we have independent judiciary who can decide whether anyone is guilty or not. And the Freedom of Information Law, which will give us access to many of these files. I don't think the international community will take us on if we have this, but we must do it in the next 2 months. If not, it will be too late.
Mr. Wickramasinghe, when you were the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka on 2 occasions, you were credited with very sound economic policies. You were credited with your relations with other countries, mainly the United States, with the United Kingdom, with India. But when the war actually came to its final stages, you were not in the island, and so was the President. Both of you were overseas. And there were allegations that you were having international discussions with other countries about the situation in Sri Lanka. What are your thoughts on that?
I didn't have discussion with anyone. The war was over. I had to go to England. I went to England and came back. That's all. I had no discussions at all. I went to England also to help one of my colleagues who was coming forward as a member of the European Parliament, Mr. Niranjan Devaditya. But I didn't have a plane to come back running to Colombo, so I had to take the normal airlines and come in.
And even after you came in, there was actually not much said about what you thought or what the United National Party had to say about this.
We did issue communiques.
Victory.
The party issued, because we thought best put it down in writing at that stage. But our advice was not followed. When the UN Secretary General came, he wanted to meet me, I wanted to meet him. They tried to prevent me from meeting him. Finally, Mr. Ban Ki-moon insisted he should meet me. And just before he left, I had to meet him in the visitors' room of the Katunayaka airport. Government not prepared to let me meet him or for us to have a meeting. I was accompanied by Mr. Charlie Mahendran, who had been our permanent rep in the UN when I was Prime Minister, who was a friend of Mr. Ban Ki-moon. They said, no, you can't meet Mr. Ban Ki-moon. And he was asked to leave and stay in my car.
Well, with that, we're going for another commercial break. We'll be right back with Face to Face. Stay with us. Back, you're watching Face to Face live on Newsfirst. We're in conversation with Mr. Ranil Wickramasinghe, the opposition leader of the country. Mr. Wickramasinghe, we were talking about the UNHRC resolution and its impact on Sri Lanka. Another significant international development is Mr. Narendra Modi being sworn in as the Prime Minister of India after the BJP swept the boards at the recent presidential elections. Now, during the meeting with the SAARC members who he invited for the swearing-in ceremony, he met with President Mahinda Rajapaksa, And the first thing he spoke about was urging Sri Lanka to make a political solution to the national issue and implementing the 13th Amendment, which even goes beyond that. And this is resounding the same words that were expressed by the President some time back. How do you think Sri Lanka should really respond to this statement made by Modi?
Well, President Rajapaksa and the government did make a pledge to the then Indian Prime Minister Mr. Manmohan Singh and to their Foreign Minister that they will give a political solution, and they said that they'll go beyond the 13th Amendment. They called it 13 plus. Now at least you must implement, then you have to implement up to the existing part of the Constitution. I would say the best thing is for President Rajapaksa to immediately agree and implement his own solution, the LLRC recommendations. That's the way out, and bring in the 17th Amendment. that then you would meet up with the basic minimum requirements. It's not a question of doing what Mr. Modi said or doing what President Rajapaksa promised Manmohan Singh. Is doing what the commission he appointed has recommended. So I think that's the way out. And nothing else. I don't think there's any other option. You can't go around making promises. He's not like the Sri Lankan electorate. You make a promise and you break it. You can't do that. And I'm sure Mr. Modi, Narendra Modi, must have looked at the Prime Minister's office files, and the notes were there. These were the agreements reached at the different discussions the two heads of government had, either in Delhi or once in Colombo or at other meetings. And he said, you better fulfill it. Now the President must tell us why he went and make the statements if you're not going to fulfill it. Now he won't tell the Parliament, he won't take the Parliament to confidence. But I'm telling him, we'll support him if he is prepared to implement the LLRC recommendations fully. The UMP will stand behind him.
Will the UMP stand behind him if he also fulfills the 13th Amendment to the Constitution and go beyond? Would the UMP still be with
what is beyond? If he tells us, we will say openly discuss. But we're saying let's not get that far. Just get the 13th, get the LLRC implemented. That would include the provincial councils, and get the 17th Amendment. Then you are finding a way out of it. You sorted a problem out with India, and you are finding a way out to even to meet with the international community. If you bring in the Latin House principles at the last meeting of the Commonwealth heads of government, which was presided over by President Rajapaksa, they have agreed to give effect to the Latin House principles. So he is not doing anything new. No one is forcing him. And then we ask him, okay, have the freedom of information bill. That will help you to meet the international community. If you do this, the first two measures will certainly sort out the problems with India, and the next two measures will ensure that you haven't got all this pressure.
What about pressure from the Tamil National Alliance, which says that they need police powers, land powers in the north, otherwise how are they going to function up?
The land powers have been sorted out by the Supreme Court judgment. If you bring the 17th Amendment, you have a depoliticized police. The chief ministers can't politicize it, the president can't politicize it. I think that's what you and I both want. Everyone wants a depoliticized police. We saw what happened in Berual. This is our politicization.
Well, coming to the Berual incident and the tensions that broke out in Aludgama and Beruala just last week, tensions between the Muslims and the Sinhalese, there were lots of allegations being thrown here and there. What are your views of what transpired and how the government dealt with the issue?
First was setting fire to a Muslim shop in Aludgama. That should be investigated and action taken. Nothing was done. Secondly was the assault of the Buddhist priest, the car that he was travelling in. The police said he was assaulted. Mr. Rauf Hakim speaking in Parliament said the car was damaged, the priest was not assaulted. Nevertheless, the priest was in hospital. At that stage, the government should have asked the key Nayaka theatres of the area, the Kande Vihara priest. Kande Vihara is one of our chief centres also for the Vishnu worship in the country. I think the south is Devundara and Kande Vihara. The Malevana temple, the priest, and maybe Reverend Palita and some of the other Nayaka priests to get together and sort this out. That was on This happened on Thursday. By Friday, Saturday they could have done it because they know the Muslims. There are some of the Muslims who help who are connected to the temples and sort this out. They didn't do that. Instead of which they allowed the outside force, the Budhbada Sena, to come in on Sunday and go into Dargah town. That was utterly unnecessary. All this could have been settled by the local Nayaka priests, all of whom are respected, I know them well. Who decided to bring them in? Why did they bring them in? So those are the answers. And then you allow this procession to go into Dargah town, which is mainly Muslim. And what's the end result? The country has got a bad name, the Buddhists have got a bad name because of this government's inactivity, and a few extremists in the state. The Mahanayaka, Reverend Mahanayaka priest are upset, the other Buddhist priests are upset. I mean, we are talking with each other, both as Sri Lankans and as Buddhists. What on earth has happened? And is this what the Rajapaksa regime is talking of?
We've also seen on television many times where politicians in this country go to the Mahanayaka theories to seek their blessings. They talk about the issues in the country. We've not seen that a lot from you, Mr. Wickramasinghe.
I go and meet the Mahanayakas. I don't take the cameras with me. But I think religion is one issue, and we can certainly take in the advice not only given by the Mahanayakas and other priests, but even the Christian clergy, the cardinals, the bishops, the Protestant bishops, Muslims, Hindus. We take that into account. But we are politicians, and we must behave like politicians, and we should not involve the Mahasangha just for our personal popularity. We must, if we have a manifesto, we have our political philosophy, certainly we put it forward to the country. The others will comment on it. But mine is that we have to respect the Sangha and we should not drag them in. Now you've gone beyond that. Now the government is bypassing the hierarchy and trying to create their own hierarchy.
Well, it's time now for another short break. We'll be back on Face to Face. Stay with us. On the presidential election, so how would the United National Party really prove to the people more than a weak in opposition? Welcome back to Face. We're in conversation with Mr. Ranil Wickramasinghe. We were talking about the Alutgam incident, but let's move back to the international arena. We've seen Sri Lanka getting closer and closer to China in terms of development, in terms of funding. Your thoughts on China's involvement and the relationship between China and Sri Lanka?
Sri Lanka has a long relationship with China. China has helped us against the LTT. They have stood by us. I mean, it's like we have stood by them too. But I have even acknowledged that China has a role to play in the Indian Ocean. But we've also got to remember that India is there as the strongest regional state. They call themselves the regional power. I mean, we have no problem with that. We don't want anyone establishing hegemony, but nevertheless, India is the regional power. So we've got to look at the relationship between that. One of the issues that has come up is that some of the commercial deals with China are corrupt. The loans itself, that the cost that's been incurred by us is twice the actual cost. Then there's the whole the so-called port city issues. So those are issues that have come up, and we'll be taking it up. I've told my friend, the Chinese ambassador, but that should not affect the relationship between China and Sri Lanka. Just as much we took up the whole issue of the Krish Towers, it didn't affect the relationship between India and Sri Lanka. If there any other fraud by any Indian commercial organization, we will certainly take it up. From time to time now you find in countries, for instance in England, the serious fraud office went into many of the deals, including its Saudi Arabia selling a jet fighter, but that did not in any way affect the diplomatic relations between the two countries. But I am against trying to play China off against India or India against China, thinking that we can be the benefit. That's what this government is doing. They got away with it with Dr. Manmohan Singh. But what I see now is that China and India are speaking to each other. Mr. Modi himself had been to China 4 times. At the end of the day, there must be some agreement between China. It's good for all of us. It may help also to smoothen things generally with Pakistan and India. But when that comes, you have to remember that when the two giants get together, people who play around are the ones who get crushed. And at some stage there will be, India will insist, look, we are the regional power there, you are the regional power in the East Pacific area, East Asia. So how do we work it out? So in that, we might become the victims, not for anything else, because we try to play India against China, China against India, and when they start talking to each other, then we will realize what a bad position we are in, weak position we are in.
But if you look at the economic landscape in Sri Lanka, there's been significant development after the conclusion of the war. Recently, the central bank said that the trade deficit has reduced to 17.7%, and that industrial exports have increased, agricultural exports, specifically tea and coconut, has increased. So it looks like the country is on a correct economic path. As I said earlier, when you were in office, you were credited with having good economic transformations in the country, really steering the economy forward, bringing down inflation. But do you think that the economic benefits or the economic advances that the country has achieved now being passed on from the upper class to the middle class to the lower class? Is it all being felt right down to the bottom?
Do you save more money today than 2 years ago? Or 1 year ago? That's the question. Can you manage the income? What are the so-called industrial exports? When I was Prime Minister in 2003, our total apparel exports were 3.5 billion. Bangladesh is 5 billion. I went and initiated the work on the GSP Plus, which Chandrika Kumaratunga finished. Then I started work on FTA with USA and the Economic Cooperation Agreement with India. Now all those, 2 of them were not followed, and the government pulled back out of the GSP Plus. Today, where are we? We have our apparel exports are about 4.5 billion, and Bangladesh is 20 billion. All our exports together is not 20 billion. If you had carried on, you would have had over 10 billion worth of exports of apparels from Sri Lanka. We haven't. All we are having is we are sending more and more people off for unskilled jobs in the Middle East, because we cannot provide them with employment here, and that's bringing us about $6 billion. We have the foreign loans, the Chinese loans, which we have to repay. Already our debt service, we have our debt service about $15 billion. In the next 4 years, we have to pay $6 billion back. Now who's going to pay that? You and I will have to pay more taxes, more VAT. You're getting a few people who are getting rich, 1%. They have all the money. They are taking cuts on all the deals. A few are doing it, other 99% are suffering.
How would a UMP government change this situation?
In 2001, we had to take over a government where we had, for the first time in our history, we had minus growth, deficit growth. Within a year, we got growth back. By 2003, there was enough money in the country. 77, we took over a country which again, the economy had collapsed. We put it back in 2 years. UMP is good at it. It's a question of sustaining what we do.
Moving on to the education sector, Mr. Wickramasinghe, the education sector is also seeing a lot of issues. We see the university students out on the streets. If you pass the Colombo University, there are people who are there from day until night protesting on a Satyagraha campaign. We've seen the health sector too, where doctors are on strike, nurses are on strike, medical services are on strike. But in the midst of all this, what is the opposition doing? How is the opposition trying to highlight these issues?
Already we have taken the free education issue down into the country, into the grassroots. A big movement is building up. You'll see that in the next month or so. We've been talking to other parties, other organizations, that free education is becoming one major issue. It's not merely a question of the universities. We are looking at the education as a whole. The spending is less. The agreement that we've had with IMF, the government has to cut back on expenditure. But when they are cutting back on expenditure, there are areas that they cannot touch, like debt service, which is going up, the salaries which you can't touch, defense which the government won't touch. So the whole, the cuts have come mainly on the education and health. So we have now taken a policy decision that we will over the next few years ensure that the expenditure on education is increased. Finally, the target will be annual expenditure should equal 6% of the GDP. We brought in a right to education bill, which should be moved by one of our members of parliament, Akila Karivasam. The government had refused to accept it. Another member of our parliament, Mr. Kabir Hashim, has moved an amendment to the constitution to incorporate the right of access to education, which is a fundamental right, which is a right guaranteed under the UN Human Rights Declaration. The government refuses to take those two up. We want to bring in two new laws. One is a university management law. We are talking with the academics, where there will be academic freedom in the management of the affairs of the universities. And finally, a university development law, where you set down the you have a 5-year plan, determine the money necessary, and vote that annually. And the parliament will discuss what the results are, whether they have voted enough money as agreed in the plan. So we do have the plans, which we are talking with others, of bringing the sector up. There has been a total collapse. There are no free education anymore. I was today in Maharagama, and they told me the Mahinda Rajapaksa Mahavidyalaya, which has a Mahindodaya Vidyagare, whatever on earth that is, but you have to spend, parents have to spend at least 50,000 rupees a year for a student. If you have 2 kids, that's 1 lakh.
And the health sector as well, as I pointed out, there have been a lot of strikes in the health sector, from the GMOA, the GNOA, the paramedics, all going in for strikes at irregular intervals. What would the UMP government change in the health sector?
Firstly, we have to ensure that there are drugs in the hospitals, that the surgery and the operations, the essential ones, are carried out in due time. Thirdly, that we get the different sectors of the health, different categories of the health sector to work together. Today you find the tug-of-war between the GMOA, the medical people, the paramedics, the nurses, the technicians, and the government is using that divide and rule. But it means even the hospital management is suffering. But you must have you must have sufficient health, sufficient medicines for people. You must be able to do the surgeries, and we may have to consider, all party committee and the parliament may have to consider going in gradually, step by step, into a national health insurance scheme.
In Parliament, it's been seen more often than not, whenever a motion has been put forward, it's always defeated, and the UMP in any of its motions, it's always defeated in Parliament. Doesn't this not show a lack of confidence in the voters when such things happen in Parliament, when the voice of the opposition in Parliament is always, silent, or is always made to be silent?
Made to be silent. We are defeated, but that's the way the Westminster system operates. It's called elected dictatorship. Or you say the opposition has its say, the government has its way. But there are a lot of conventions behind it. You find this in India, find it in UK, it's not there anymore. But we've also got to decide, are we going to stick to adversarial system when you do away with the executive presidency, or are you going to have more cooperative system like in Germany or in Northern Europe? Haven't we got to think now that there are no ideological differences, but to restore democratic rights and also at least agreement among parties as to the basic framework. Now what's happened here is we did have agreement on the market economy, free education, free health, but the Rajapaksa regime, in trying to entrench its rule and the fact that they wanted a few people to benefit, they've done away with all the arrangements that have been among the parties. Now that's a big problem for us, JVP and others. The framework has been removed. Now we must have a political system where we agree on a framework and then they fight for power within that framework.
Venerable Madhuluavi Sobhita Thera has constantly been saying that he's interested in coming in as a common candidate for the presidential election, and his main objective is to abolish the executive presidency. Do you have an objective in mind of abolishing the executive presidency when you take up the presidency, or if your party wins the elections?
At the last sessions, we adopted a resolution that we will abolish the executive presidency. Reverend Sobhita has stated that as far as he is concerned, if there is no one else who is willing to come forward, that he will come forward. But we have also been talking with other political parties and with Reverend Sobhita.
getting back into the United National Party and its internal working of the party, the United National Party is the largest opposition party in the country, Mr. Wickramasinghe. You cannot really simply hide what happens inside the party. It makes it into the media and then it goes across to the general public. Now, there were lots of allegations that were leveled at you as well about the construction of this leadership council, and the United Bhikkhu Front was of the view that the leadership would transfer its powers to this leadership council. There are a lot of allegations about the mechanism of transferring a power to a leadership council, and allegations that you had not done it accordingly.
The powers of the leadership council was decided by the working committee. I suggested that the powers transferred to me on day-to-day affairs be given to them. That's a good thing. It was taken up at the party sessions and everyone voted for it. No one opposed it.
Also, allegations that the working committee consists of people with a depleted voter base, and that those who have really the skills and the talents and who really rise up and speak out in the party are undermined through various disciplinary committee meetings, through various inquiries, suspension of membership. How would you answer these allegations?
The voter base belongs to the party, not to individuals. We all vote for the party.
But wouldn't
within that people compete. Within that within that people compete for the preferences. When they leave us, that's the end of it. But the voter base belongs to a party, which is UPFA or SLFP or UNP or others.
It does, but also the party is made up of individuals who have the faith and the trust of the people.
Party is made up of large, UNP consists of a large number of voters, and we do select some of us to be candidates. We are not around a family like the UPFA today.
But there are allegations that those who are in this council have depleted voter bases, and those who really have strong voter bases.
The whole working committee was done by a constitution which was drafted by Mr. Joseph Michael Pereira, Vijayadasa Rajapaksa and others, and it replaced the constitution which I had drafted earlier. So it's according to that, and the criteria given. It's done by the advisory committee which they established. Earlier the leader did that. That's all. So why get into the debate?
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Wickramasinghe? I would appreciate a direct answer. And I'm going to rephrase this question. There are allegations, and as I said earlier, voters, when they vote, numbers speak louder than promises, manifestos, whatever. And when voters vote for a particular individual, that individual is seen as a UMP or UPFA, a JVP representative. There are allegations that in the leadership council, in the working committee, there are individuals who have depleted voter bases, and those who do have strong voter bases are not being included in this committee.
Everyone with a strong voter base is there. And secondly, the UNP, the votes come for the party, and then only it's decided on individuals. I mean, Colombo, the votes come for the UNP. Then I get the preferences. Now, you and I seem to be having a difference on that. That will never be overcome. You think individuals bring in votes? No, because the largest votes the party gets is when you see a presidential election. You know, whether it's the UPFA or the UNP, it's at the presidential election when people vote for a party and the candidate.
But doesn't it build up to a presidential election?
No, it doesn't.
Doesn't the local government election,
presidential election comes. The people, it's really, this is the party oriented yet in this country. That there you and I will disagree. I say it's party oriented. People vote for it. There are some blocks of voters who stick with the party. Occasionally they change. Another group, that swing voters. That's what happens in Sri Lanka. That's what happens in India. That's what happens in England. It is not individuals. It's no longer votes for individuals.
Mr. Wickramasinghe, if you were not the opposition leader of the country, if you were not a politician, if you were a layman, if you were a middle class citizen of this country, and if you have been voting for the UMP, since your parents' time, your grandparents' times, they've been with the UMP. And Sri Lanka has many families who are UMP families. And you suddenly see Western Provincial Council, Southern Provincial Council, Northwestern Provincial Council, Central Provincial Councils, defeat. What does this say about the opposition? What does this say about the UMP?
It only means in Sri Lanka, It's the main
Wouldn't
election.
that-
No, it's the main election that decides. It's only once, and only in one instances that the opposition got power. That's after Mr. Lalit Atulagmudali was also assassinated. They thought we had done it, and the subsequent southern provincial elections. Otherwise, the general trend. When I was Prime Minister, I even won the Attanagala Pradesh Sabha. That's the trend. The next trend is going to come when there is an election, either Parliament or President in 2015. Once that is set, once you win the first election, you win the second election, and then the rest comes in it. There is a big debate within the UPFA today. Why risk for a presidential election? You may lose it. Why don't we go where everyone can get together against us? Why don't we go for a parliamentary election? So that's the debate. What should be the first election? That's the key election. Now, our one is whatever you have, we are ready to beat you, and we are getting ready for that. We've kept our strength, and we are organizing ourselves for that.
So
but it's a basic difference. You are saying no, we people. It's not so. That's why sometimes
I'm
people
speaking
say
from the mindset of the general public.
If you looked at the last provincial elections, the number of votes for the UNP, a lot of ballots in which people had voted for the UNP but not for the candidate, because they were not sure. I mean, people had crowds as the reliability. I think most of all our candidates are reliable, but people vote for parties, not for anything else. And in our system, unfortunately, the real strength comes out at the main election. Now look at the European Parliament elections. You find that the Labour and Conservatives are beaten by UKIP. But you come to any major election, it's going to be either Labour or Conservatives, not UKIP.
But wouldn't you agree that the image of the party really builds on from winning these small elections? These elections that are provincial, local government elections?
In 2001-2, for instance, the government lost it. Similarly, when we lost governmental power, we gradually lost control of it. Once you get governmental power, the rest comes. This is why the UNP is suggesting that the parliament, the provincial and the local authority elections all be held on the same day, and you don't have this what you call kada elections, and then the country can go about its work for 4 years and come back. The best thing for us, that's why we feel, is that because the trend in this country, vote for the party that's in power, you just hold all the elections on the same day, like they do in America, then give a 4-year or 5-year break and you have it again. And fixed term elections. So we are thinking anew on this. I hope you agree with us.
Well, you're privy to your opinion, Mr. Wickramasinghe, but how will you change this mindset of the general public? Because I am asking you questions from the mindset of the general public who are not savvy with politics, who just see what is on the newspaper, who read and get educated through whatever media reports that are out there. These are normal people who don't have the political know-how that you have or the understanding that you may have. And in these people's minds, in the general public's mind, as I started earlier, there is this image of a weak opposition. It's an image, which is a strong image, which may actually have an impact on the presidential election. So how would the United National Party really prove to the people that it is more than a weakened opposition?
I follow what the people say. And now what they are saying is we want to change the government. Is the UNP ready? What are their policies? What are they going to do? So you've got to respond to that. That means they want a change in the government. And there will be about 5% for whom both sides will contend at the election itself. And we are preparing ourselves to come up with our plans. We have already talked about what we will do in education, how we get together, and how we proceed. So that the country is entitled to know, and we have to tell them that. There was a time at which we have protested, they said we are not doing anything. But I said my strategy was, okay, many of us agreed, allow the first 2-3 years, let's see how they perform, and then take it on from there.
And how are you going to get the grassroots level United National Parties involved in this journey towards a presidential election? Because you say that is the most important elections. Yeah. So how are you going to get the grassroots organizations, the grassroots politicians of the UMP in the same sort of thinking as you are? We
do have, but we've got to organize it better, mobilize them. That's why the party approved what's called the Janajaya program, to have committees, Janajaya committees in every polling booth. That's about 12,000, and we are working at it now.
And
that's handled by the Leadership Council, not by me. So it's.
And finally, Mr. Wickramasinghe, I would like to know what are your thoughts on your personal journey ahead? Maybe after the presidential election, if the United National Party becomes victorious or if it suffers defeat, what is your personal aim or what is your personal journey like?
First one is the journey to get rid of the Rajapaksa regime. Then we can relax and think of what we are going to do next. But if we don't get a Rajapaksa regime, none of you will have a good future. You have your expectations, your hopes, and you want to fulfill it. The Rajapaksas can't do it. So once we know that we are on that track, and the public will ensure that they are happy, that their beliefs, their expectations, their hopes are being attained, or at least they have the means of achieving it, then we can all be happy. And we'll decide from there when to go next. You know, in battle you must first win the war and then decide what you're going to do after the war.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Wickramasinghe, for joining us on Face to Face. It was indeed a pleasure speaking to you and hearing your views. Thank you very much. And for everyone at home, thank you very much for joining us on Face to Face. See you and good night.
Thank you. Thank you again.